everybody, my name is Helen Thompson. I'm the Education Coordinator here at the Museum of Culpeper History, and thank you for joining us for virtual hands-on history today. All right, so today we are going to be making our own natural history museums, and in these natural history museums we are going to have dinosaur skeletons. So for this activity we're going to need a couple materials that should be pretty easy to find around your house. So we're going to need parchment paper, a pair of scissors, some Elmer's glue, or you can use any glue that's going to dry clear or white. Just some tape, any kind is going to work. And then we're also going to need to download the PDFs for the dinosaur skeletons that are below the video. So the next couple things we need for the final part is you're going to need some sort of large sheet of paper. I'm using black because it provides a lot of contrast, but you can use whatever kind of color you have. And then if you have any colorful scrap pieces of paper, those will also be handy. So to start, we are going to be making our dinosaur skeletons. Now this is pretty easy. So what you're going to do is you're just going to take your printed out page, just attach a couple little pieces of tape around your dinosaur skeleton silhouette. And this is going to keep the parchment paper from flopping all over the place, but you'll still be able to peel it back pretty easily because parchment paper is resistant. Don't need a piece too big. So you're just going to take it, lay it down. Nope. This will work a little bit better. All right. Now for this part, you're going to have to be pretty precise and a little bit slow in your movements. So what we're going to be doing is basically drawing with our glue. So you're going to want to pick a glue dispenser that's got kind of a fine tip on it. So you're just going to take a little bit of glue and just kind of draw it around. It's kind of like painting with a pen. Now some of our skeletons, like this one for instance, have pieces on it that don't visibly attach to your main skeleton. So you're going to kind of have to attach those just by making up connections, which is perfectly fine. Now, you've got some parts that are a little bit trickier, like the head. And then, now for things like the rib cage, you're just going to kind of want to pull the glue out to make little bumps. Now, it's going to be pretty hard to get every single rib visible, so you can kind of just make up the bumps as you go. It might also help if you have like a paper clip or toothpick or something to sort of pull out the finer bits. But here we have a pretty big visible rib cage, so we can just use glue to draw that on. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, so don't worry too much about that. It is going to dry a little bit flat, so if things don't look exactly the way they do on the skeleton silhouette, that is not a problem. Okay, so I've got a little bit of mine done, and what I'm going to do for these pieces of spikes, I'm just going to connect those with a little bit of glue. Now this is obviously going to take a little while to dry, at least 12 hours I'd say, so this is kind of a two-part project. So I'm going to set this aside and get going on my dried skeleton. So it's a little hard to see here, but it's nice and dried on there. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to kind of want to push the back of the parchment just very lightly. You don't really want to pull the skeleton off. Now if you have any pieces come off or break off, that's perfectly fine. It's made of glue. You can just glue it back together. It's no big deal. Now see, my tail just came off, but that's okay. you guys can see. And then my tail. Now I can just glue the tail back on when I glue it onto this page over here. Okay, so moving over. Now, when you're thinking about designing your museum, you want to sort of imagine yourself walking into a big room or maybe multiple smaller rooms. So if you've been to some natural history museum before, or even art museums or anything like that, you kind of know the basic layout for things. So a lot of times natural history museums will have, like the big Tyrannosaurus Rex, like right in front, or something really big and just like showy and just, wows the crowd. Now you can do that, or you could organize it differently. You could have one gallery just for carnivores, one gallery for herbivores. You could have all of the smaller dinosaur skeletons around the edges with the big ones in the middle, vice versa. It's completely up to you. So again, you're just going to be taking your glue and just putting it wherever you feel like you should. Once you have all your skeletons together, it might help just to kind of lay them out, move them around. But I'm just going to start with this one. And I'm going to put him in the center back. Now, your skeleton is not going to be perfectly flat. So you're just going to kind of want to pick the edges that kind of push out a little bit more, so that they feel like they're going to sit flat against your paper. And then I'm going to reattach my tail. There we go. You can see in my finished one that I also included some direction signs and some ideas of where spotlights would be. So you can cut out your spotlight however you want. Just take a little square here. Cut it like that. And then I'm going to have it pointing at the head, because that's kind of one of the big and coolest points about the skeleton. And then if you want some arrows kind of pointing people to where they should be walking, you can also do that. So let's say that I want people to walk this way, because I'm going to imagine them going around this way and through over here to see something over there. All right. So a big part of working in a museum is knowing how to design exhibits. It's not just having artifacts to show. You also want to have information to go with them. And picking out information can be kind of tricky, because there's tons of information you could have about one of these dinosaur skeletons. It could fill an entire museum. But you want to pick stuff that people are going to want to read, something quick, because they're not going to be able to sit around for hours to read this. So I've got a couple little text box right over here about each dinosaur. So for the Bronchiosaurus, I have that it has a bump on its nose, which you can see on the skeleton. Now it's up over here on its forehead. Now, most animals you see are going to have the nose farther down on its face. So this is kind of a unique thing that, the people coming in might notice, and it'd be cool to learn about. Now, for theropods, I have that they could be anywhere from 2 pounds to 6 tons. So now this is pretty interesting, because it kind of tells you that, what you're seeing isn't all there is. For the Tyrannosaurus Rex, I have that they were about 40 feet long and 12 feet tall, but they could only run 10 miles per hour. Now, how do scientists know this? Well, they took a look at the skeleton and dinosaur tracks that were found, and they were able to tell, how long their length was, taking into account their weight and how quick they could move. So that's some pretty cool stuff there. And then for my Stegosaurus, I have that the little spikes are made of bone, but they are not attached to the skeleton. So when paleontologists go and they find these skeletons, they notice that they are not attached, which is pretty interesting. One other interesting thing about these dinosaur fossils is that if you go to a natural history museum and you see them, you'll notice that they're not clean and white. They're usually sort of like a darker, muddled brown. Now this is because these skeletons have minerals and water seep into them over time. So it's not pure bone what you see in the museum. So that can kind of explain the different color changes. And that might also be something you want to have in your museum for the public to know, because that's kind of an interesting question. Typically when we see bone, it's, fairly white or maybe a little bit yellowish, but definitely not a dark brown. So that's something you might also want to explain to the public. So however you decided to design your museum, whether you wanted to do it by grouping or just by size, I hope you had a lot of fun with this activity. Now, thank you for joining us for Hands-on History at the Museum of Culpeper History, and have a great day.